Let's keep the party going. The AV logo had emphasis on had the words animals, environment, and health underneath, right? Time and time again, you've made the animals the focal point of your activism, and rightfully so. Why is this the case, and why should all activists make this the foundation for their outreach?
Because we started talking about environment and health to make the animal rights message more adoptable for people. That's the only reason why we started talking about environment and health. There's supplementary conversations. And what we don't realize, and what I'm pointing out now, is that when you start talking about the environment and health, it doesn't supplement, actually. It marginalizes. And so you reduce the seriousness of the animal rights message. I didn't realize I was doing this, of course, but I've come to learn that when you don't entertain the environment and health discussions, which is what non-vegans want, by the way, because a health and environment discussion doesn't have any accountability attached to it. What you do with your personal health is a personal choice. What you do for the environment is also a personal choice. But whether you stab animals to death or not is not a personal choice. Okay, you have no fucking right. And that kind of discussion, that accountability discussion, is what non-vegans are either subconsciously or consciously trying to run away from. Mm-hmm. Every time they interact with you as a vegan. Yeah. And if you're having a conversation that is direct with them.
That is in fact the case. Yeah, I can totally relate. Like my best friend, he and I go at it all the time. He's not vegan. So he always resorts to debating whether or not meat has the protein, because technically you can make a case that meat doesn't have fucking protein. Whereas you can talk to me about climate change and you can debate that too. It's statistics and you can whip out the math and do the studies, whatever. But at the end of the day, a knife to a throat is not debatable. That
correct
is black and white. Whereas, the other two, I call it the trifecta. You're a vegan for the animals, you're vegan for the health, you're vegan for the, fucking climate or whatnot. But at the end of the day, you cannot debate me that a cow will never ever waltz into an abattoir willfully, dancing all the way to the kill floor. That'll never happen. And they never ever debate me on that topic because it's a topic they know right from the get-go they will never win versus you or me.
Yeah, I mean, this has happened in other justice movements as well. There's always distractions that are laid out by the oppressors. Those who are the victimizers do this, and then we play into that. We appease that shit by entertaining those arguments. So we think we need to get super educated on the environment argument and the health argument. And we also can see how big the environment crisis is as a result of animal agriculture, and how big the health crisis is as a result of people eating animals and their body parts. Heart disease being the biggest killer, cancer. And I know this because I studied the health aspect more than most people in this movement when it comes to like animal rights and being an animal rights activist.
I read all that, yeah.
I have a nutritionist background, okay? I studied this shit intently. But, so it's very tempting for me to go into the nutrition arguments when people bring them up.
Which is something that you probably can beat them in and talk about heme iron and all this jazz.
Yeah.
But you focus on the animals because it's not debatable. Again, I agree with you.
And that's what this is. It's an animal. We're animal rights activists. This is an animal rights movement, and veganism is animal rights. The only reason that we have an environment crisis and we have a health crisis and we now have pandemics, well, we have always, but we're dealing with one right now, is because people don't take animal abuse seriously. That's the underlying issue. So instead of talking about the symptoms, which are big symptoms, the largeness, the size of the symptom is only reflection of how big the source is, the problem is. So as big as the symptom is, the health crisis, the environment crisis, as big as they are, it's only a reflection of how much animals are overlooked, and what they're subjugated to is overlooked and is completely ignored by us, vegan activists, the only ones speaking up for them. So it's a crime.
Classic case of cause and effect, basically, right?
Yeah, you're right. It's only linked as far as it is a symptom of the problem. But it's not like, oh, you could be vegan for the environment and vegan for health. Those people are the worst kind of vegans ever. Vegans. Because we think that they're going to cause less harm to animals, so we might as well promote the environment and the health to them. But what we do is we set people up to be the worst kind of vegans ever. One, because they're usually the kind of vegans that come out and say, I'm no longer vegan anymore, and here's why. Because the health aspect didn't work for me. And environmentally, I could actually justify it if I just kill one deer every year. Or I eat one fish every month. Or whatever they can. And I eat locally, and I only eat the vegetables out of my garden, so they could justify the environmental aspect. Then what they also do is when they promote veganism to others, they do such a horrible job at it, it makes the rest of the movement look ridiculous.
Give me an example, and I apologize for cutting you off, but give me an example of that particularly.
Like, they'll sit with non-vegans and eat meals with them, right? And non-vegans are obviously eating body parts. And they'll say, oh, I don't mind, that's your personal choice, and I have my personal choice. So they make it seem like this injustice is just a personal choice that you have, whether you want to participate in it or not. And as we know, that you don't have a personal choice in this. This is injustice. We wouldn't say that in the case of child abuse. So it's just polluting what it means to be vegan. In other words, to be an animal rights person, to be an animal defender.
Yeah.
And they also do this thing where they talk shit about other vegans who are activists, who are refusing to be enablers of animal abuse and speaking about this boldly. They'll say, oh, those kinds of vegans are horrible. They should just respect people's choices, and they're so extreme, they're basically terrorists. They talk shit about all of the other vegans who are actually doing something. So they make a mockery of animal rights, and they make it harder for us to get through to people because they've been comforted and validated by this other vegan.
Right.
So we have more work to do in order for people to take this seriously.
Yeah.
And they're the worst kind of vegans because they also will go to the cupcake events, they'll go to the potlucks, the picnics and the festivals, but they won't go to the animal rights events. I mean, the ratio is crazy of how many people will go to a festival, go to a picnic, some kind of meetup, but it's like 10 to 1, if maybe even more than that, of how many people will actually show up to an animal rights event. So veganism is not conflated with animal rights like it should be. And it's because of those kinds of people. They think that veganism is something else when it's only about animals.
Right. Yeah. No, I agree. I used to have a coworker at home who was or at work, I should say, who was vegan for her health. She was battling all sorts of autoimmune disease, and a plant-based diet did in fact help her. But when she and I got together to talk about veganism, she would never have mentioned animal rights or animal activism or even remotely come close to having a pet. So I know that she was in it for selfish reasons. And admittedly, that is how I started. I was once paralyzed from the neck down, but then I opened my eyes to see the bigger picture. And that's why I'm standing here with you today talking about the subject. So I agree in the sense that type of vegan dilutes the impact words can have in the right mindset of people who are willing to freaking listen. So I wholeheartedly agree with you. Yeah.
Yeah.
So let me ask you this. There's an outreach video, and I enjoyed it this morning, by the way, of you in the subways of New York City, in which I was admittedly studying the way you go about your business. I can't help but notice that your eyes, when you're looking at somebody, like you're wavering in between, both of their eyes like a fucking shark, just waiting to hear what I need to hear. As if you're looking for something, as if you're hunting for some key words to trigger your rebuttals. And, that was fucking fascinating to me. What are some of these triggers you look for in order to pounce on them right then and there? It's almost as if you're like fucking forecasting that blood in the water and you're like sinking your teeth in, like intellectually. Talk to me about that. I found it fucking mind-blowing today.
Well, that's an interesting perspective, but that's due to experience. I already know what people are going to say before they say it, and I'm looking for triggers of certain arguments, and it usually falls under the umbrella of human supremacism. So it's always something like, oh, we just kill them quickly, just humanely, just slice their throats, and they don't know what's coming. And that's the way I think some industries do it like that, and that's what I would like to think I support. And then, so what was your question? Your question was...
Right, so again, I was just, in preparation, I was watching a little bit of your outreach videos, namely the more recent ones, and again, you were looking at this, I think it was an African-American woman in the subways of New York City. Her back was turned, I don't know if you remember, maybe it was like three months ago.
Yeah, I do.
And you were like biting your tongue, waiting for that, like, say it, I know you're going to say it, I've heard it a million times before, I'm going to pound right at. And you were like so closely, like going. I enjoyed the shit out of that, and it's like that shows the experience that you have. That shows your 10,000 hours. That shows that I've done this. This isn't my first rodeo, cowgirl. You know what I'm saying? So, so again, those triggers. Like, what are those easy, pitch and catch triggers that you can share with us so that you can have that rebuttal ready?
Like that, in that outreach interaction, she said, I just feel like there's bigger issues. Like humans, it should be focused on before the animals. Yeah, the amount of times I've fucking heard that. So when she said that, I said, do you say that to any other group that you approach on the streets? Like if we were a feminist group, would you come up to us and say, what about homelessness though? Or, what about children in Africa? They're starving. And she said, no, absolutely I wouldn't. And it's very simple. Like, I've simplified this so much now to the point where it's just so easy to call people out on their hypocrisy and to hold them accountable. And I think that that's the most effective way to do it, is when you just do it simply. And that shut her down immediately. She started to, like, throughout the rest of the interaction, you could tell that she was talking with her tail between her legs.
That's it. That's a good way to put it. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's one. But there's others, and I guess you'll see them in my outreach there. Yeah. But it's always just a simple process of dealing with the objection, which should only be a very small moment in time, and then going back to accountability. So, like, in that case, I pointed out the fact that she would never do this with any other group, so why would she do it with us? And then I go back to, so how do you justify what you're doing? Like, even if there are other problems, how do you justify this?
Right. I think it's very wise of you to, number one, use a human problem that they can identify with on a personal level to use an alternate scenario and shove it right back in their face. Hence the reason why you and I use, child rape or female rape or any rape for that matter, I would never abuse a kid. Why don't you speak up about that kind of thing? So, yeah, I definitely, I use that same tactic of, identifying a problem, or using, I should say, a problem with they identify. So I think that's huge. Now,
That's
admittedly, it wasn't until you used speciesism, until you mentioned it, is the first form of discrimination that we're taught as human beings. It actually registered with me personally. I had never thought to go as far back as that. What role do this have on psychology well into our teenage and adult years?
Well, the first person to say this was Gary Ruskin.
Right.
He said that this is the first form of discrimination that we're taught. Right. And it makes all the sense because we have body parts shoved into our throats from our parents, and we're told that that's normal. It's normal to eat these animals, and then I used to say, like, then we're told, like, to be kind to the dog and kind to the cat, but actually, it's not really that. We're not really that kind to dogs and cats, so I don't even care about making that distinction anymore. It's just that we are taught to be bigots in relation to animals, because even with dogs and cats, we see them as here to, like, they're just products of cuteness, there to entertain us and keep us company. So that's also bigotry, and so that's why I don't make that distinction anymore. What I found from my own experience growing up was that I was taught to hate animals because they are just here for us. So that's the idea that I was fed, literally in my mouth and also in my ears. And my dad, for example, like, we had to move house when I was 17, and my dad refused to take the dog that we had with us to the new house. And so my dad put the dog in a shelter, and they give the dog 2 weeks before they murder the dog. That's their rule, right? 2 weeks to find, an adoptee and someone to adopt the dog. And my little brother and my older brother were very emotional over this, but I wasn't necessarily. I thought it was, like, it's a bit sad, but I didn't really get caught up on it. And that cemented this idea that, like, animals are just, they're just, like, they're here for us, and we can just get rid of them at any time. Like, they come and go. They're just things that we can replace pretty easily. We can just get a new dog. Isn't that what people say? We'll just get a new dog when a dog is, for whatever reason, not with us anymore. We just get a new dog. Right. And it's that's how people think about animals. And so this is the first form of bigotry that we're taught. And I've learned this through what Gary said, but also when I analyze my own life and everybody else's. It's pretty clear that our first form of hatred of others was learned through our relationship to non-human animals. And since it's so relevant in the world, it's the largest, longest standing injustice, it's also the biggest form of bigotry, not just the first that we're taught. So it makes a lot of sense that if we eradicate that it will have a domino effect on a lot of other issues. It will not eliminate everything else, but it will put us in a much better position to look at everything else.
Right. I agree. Veganism has raised my awareness, not just on what I put in my mouth, but, interpersonal relationships, politics. Like, my conscience level has been raised through the roof simply by making that switch as to how I see animals. It's fucking mind-blowing. And it's not until you go vegan that you see it. That's my perspective. Exactly. It's not until you go vegan that you see it. So again, what is that role? What role does that have on psychology, human psychology, well within our teenage and adult years, you think? Like, how come we don't make peace with it until we're grown ass people?
Well, some people go vegan sooner. Because we live in a sick society, man. They've done a number on us. And we live in a society that is based off a death cult. Bloodthirsty rituals. You know, it's the most evil shit ever. And everybody's subjected to it. The programming. That's why I dedicate myself to like educating people, giving them a chance, you know, to come out of it. Psychologically, it's fucking evil. The fact that we're programmed with such a way of thinking, like this hatred that we have towards animals is so unbelievably unjustified. They're the most deserving beings of our moral consideration, and yet we actually hate them. Like, we call each other names. Not we, non-vegans, call each other names, animal names, to be defamatory. They use them as derogatory slurs. And they don't, like, we do this all the time. Oh, you dog. You know, we call people dogs if we think lesser of them. You know, like, even in the way we speak, there's so much hatred towards non-human animals. And then we also, to show the psychopathy, we also say that dogs are a man's best friend. I mean, our brains are fucking confused. We're confused by the hatred that we have.
Yeah. I agree with you again. It's pretty deep rooted. I mean, I for one spent 32 years of my life eating animals. My old lady, admittedly, through my medical episode, she went vegan after 58 years. That's almost 6 decades of just like deep rooted psychology, thinking that we need meat, eggs, and dairy. You know, being oblivious to the fact that these fucking animals are unnecessarily dying each and every day. And for what? I posted a quote the other day, sort of went viral, saying that we murder animals in order to produce food that kills us and our environment, or some, I don't know, it was a wordplay by that. And yeah, no, I agree with you. So Paul, admittedly, I approach my activism from a psychological standpoint. That to me is and should be considered the root of the problem. Having said this, why do you believe that people can reason with oppression such as racism and sexism, but have such a hard time with speciesism?
Well, because it's the first form of bigotry that we're taught. It's so deeply ingrained into us. And it's, you get, you know, some people are racists, but not everybody. Like, everybody's not vegan. So the guilt is shared by everybody. And so since it's the first form that we're taught and it's shared by everybody, it's the most relevant form. It's such an uphill battle. That's why I say it's an ugly process to get someone to face all of this.
So you're basically saying that since it's the very first one and it's ingrained first, that it takes longer for us to realize it, as opposed to maybe like racism, which you learn with reason, as opposed to speciesism, which you are thrusted upon, perhaps? Is that what you agree with that?
Yeah, but it's also because everybody's collectively sharing the guilt. So there's nobody's feeling like they need to make a change because no one's prompting them to do that. Everyone is prompting them, in fact, to do the opposite.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I mean, to add to your point, I think that when we use racism as a train of thought, when we use sexism, we are literally, I guess, thinking about, you know what, he's right. You know what, he's not right. And so when we adopt racism and sexism, we use critical thinking, we use reason, and for whatever reason, we use logic to come to that conclusion. Whereas speciesism, we're taught before we develop any of the aforementioned 3. So it's already, you know, it's sort of like a given to us. You know,
Correct,
that's
yeah.
where I want. That's why I wanted to ask you that question. See, sort of like gauge your thoughts on that. Yeah, do you agree with that or?
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's so deeply buried into our moral systems.
Right. I know you and I. You mentioned this briefly. I did really touch base on this. I know you and I are two dudes talking about veganism, but there's something I need to get off my chest. I feel as though a self-proclaimed feminist completely disregards vegans when we call them out for not including female animals in their fight against systemic oppression. Why do you feel this is the case, and how can we get more human rights activists to be more aware of the fact that this fight is their own too?
All I know how to do really at this point is to remind people of why they got into this, and I'm just going to do my best to put people in the animal's position and imagine what it would be like to be in their position, and to speak for them in the same way that you would want to be spoken for if you were in their position. Yeah, my answer's probably more simple than you would expect.
I was thinking we'd go off on a tangent, but I guess it's one of those things that perhaps we get shunned. I don't know if you've ever had an abortion conversation with a woman, admittedly, and they use the tactic as it's my body, I'm a woman, don't talk to me about this. You have no right or even say in the matter. But when you call a feminist out for not including female dairy cows in their fight simply because they're a different species of the gender, they throw a hissy fit and they go completely apeshit on you, and that's when this dissonance starts getting triggered. I mean, have you ever had that happen to you? Have you ever had a conversation with a self-proclaimed feminist who does a complete 180 on you?
Yeah, absolutely.
And what's their rebuttal to something that's undebatable? What do they tell you?
They just try to argue that they're separate issues and that they don't have to take this seriously. They just argue that they don't need to take this seriously and they can just continue being non-vegan. And their rebuttals are just ridiculous. Obviously, they're just pathetic. I think they, for the first time, have their bubble bursted, right? Mm-hmm. Because you're showing them, like, you're putting up a mirror and showing them that you're a fucking hypocrite,
right? And
they don't like that because they think they're on the moral high ground already. They think that they're already doing something that's righteous, and they are, but they fall short massively when they don't extend it to all females. So, it's maybe the first time that they've had that pointed out, and it's an ugly process. Once again, it's a very ugly process to realize that, like, you fucking hate animals, and you have no reason that could ever justify that.
Right, and then as a result, I don't know if you've ever gotten this, but you suddenly, out of nowhere, become the anti-feminist for bringing that part up. I mean, it's happened to me. I've had to vacate a room full of women. It wasn't pretty at all, Paul. I just wanted to put that out there.
Hey man, welcome to the vegan movement. There's haters that you write in the comments right now.
Oh, I know. I'm not paying attention. Don't pay any mind, seriously. You've been quite vocal.
I just want to point out that we just, like, this is just part of the human race. Like, there's obviously going to be people who are going to work against us for speaking this very simple truth, and we just have to accept that they're always going to be there.